The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise. You've waited long enough. Go listen to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. As always, I'm your host, David Wilms, and I've got on the other side of the internet, and I'm talking slowly to allow him to finish swallowing his Pepsi, Nephi Cole.
I don't drink Pepsi, Dave. Too much
Diet
sugar.
Pepsi.
That's right.
Diet Pepsi. You like that fake sugar.
You know, if you got to choose between diabetes and some kind of other nasty thing, like I choose the other nasty thing.
You choose the carcinogen over the diabetic.
I do. And now I realize that's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, if you will, but that's mine.
Fair enough. I'm also drinking. Mine's a Pepsi, not a diet.
Yeah, yours has sugar in it.
Mine's got the sugar in it.
Yeah,
Yep.
because
and the calories.
There's nothing you like more than a little bit of a sugar high. That's like a Dave Wilms like guaranteed. It's like childlike things, Skittles. Yeah, gummy bears, you know,
Gummy bears.
Just anything with, corn syrup in it.
That's
high fructose corn syrup.
I'm supporting our ag industry.
There you go. Well, good for you. And
Lots of corn.
And I like pharmaceuticals.
Oh, man. All right. So I got a couple of housekeeping things I wanted to run through really quick before we dive into what is a very meaty agenda today, right? Housekeeping thing number one. We've been doing this podcast for just a long time.
It's
right?
been
7,
a long
8 years.
time.
Whatever
Yeah.
it's been a long time. Right? And I'll bet this is a bet I've got out there. I'll bet that 90% of the people that listen to us have no idea what either one of us look like. You think that's probably right?
I hope so. Because that's going to be really creepy if we've been stalked. You were like, oh yeah, I know exactly what those guys look like. I know where they live.
We almost never do anything on social media, right? So we don't have much there to indicate who we are.
Yeah.
And we have not jumped on with all the masses and done these video podcasting. We've only stuck with audio. But despite the fact that both of us have a face for radio and a voice for silent film, we're about to jump onto this bandwagon, I think. We're talking about, we're actually beta testing some stuff right now on having a video option for our podcast. So we're modernizing. We're behind the times. We're modernizing. So if you want to, in future episodes, you might be able to find us on YouTube in video format. I say might because we still have to make sure it's something we can actually do.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of reluctance because we're old. We're old men, you know. Nobody likes change, Dave. And anyway, that's going to be the motif of this podcast is nobody likes change.
Is it? Maybe.
Yeah. Everything we talk about today, nobody likes change. Everything we're going to talk about.
I got to do one more thing because it's September now and we're officially into some hunting season. I feel like we have to provide some kind of a hunting update for the podcast that we record during hunting season, right?
Yeah.
I've got one. Do you have one? Have you done any yet? Have you been out yet? Yeah.
I'm planning and scouting.
Yeah, okay. There's
a lot of planning and scouting. Because, I'm a gear junkie, Dave. Yeah. And so, man, this is the expensive time of the year for me. This is when I figure out whether or not what the dollar value in terms of increased performance. I'm doing all those calculations now. My calculators, I need new batteries.
The prepping for the hunting season is more important to you than the hunting season itself.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
See, if you were just what do you call me sometimes, a fuddy duddy?
You know what this is
here?
The audience can't see this because we don't have video. This is a box full of magic right here. what's in here. It's like,
you do like those burgers.
Yeah. But now everybody knows what it is. I'm a burglar.
Yeah. Well, I think we both used those on whitetail a few years back.
Yeah, they work.
They do work. Yeah. So here's what I did. I went out, I took my 8-year-old out dove hunting in a place that I go every year. And we might have talked about that. I know we've talked about this in the past because I've had the same experience over and over and over again, which is the mourning doves are gone. Like this place, the mourning doves are just gone. And it is just now officially a collared dove hunt. Those Eurasian collared doves. That's what it is now. It's a collared dove invasive species hunt. But where I live, it is no limit, no season. It is kind of a free-for-all. And about every other year, the tree row I like to set up on is the X. And it was the X this year.
Yeah.
And yeah, I sent you a picture, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of dead invasive species.
I did my part. One mourning dove, and as it turns out, like I think 20 collared doves. It was, and that was in about an hour and a half. It was a lot of fun, and my kid had a blast. And I am a superstitious kind of guy, and I always have to hunt the dove opener, and I always have this feeling like how the dove season goes for me really tees up how the rest of the season is going to go. And last year's dove season was atrocious. That spot was not the X. I did not shoot very many doves last year, and I had a terrible all-around hunting season. So I think not only did I have a very successful opening day, I did my part to reduce the collared dove population, this invasive population, and I shot pretty well. I was pretty proud of how well I was shooting. I feel like I'm set up. And in 2 weeks, I go out antelope hunting. And a couple weeks after that, it's deer bleeding right into elk. And we're just like right into the meat of it. I'm getting super excited.
It's here. I'm ready. Do you think we should do a fishing trip next summer with fans in Alaska?
I mean, it's not something I'd say no to. It seems like a pretty fun thing.
I've got a opportunity where we could, and you know this, where a fishing lodge, it's like, hey, why don't you guys come out? So even though I don't encourage people to send emails, I'm at this time saying, like, if that's something that people would be interested in, like we're going to do, if we picked like, X number of days that we're going to go and just going to be us, and then we just invite your mountain fans who wanted to be like in the same place, same time, same lodge, if people would do it.
Yeah, let us know. yourmountain@itsyourmountain.com. Curious. If we get no emails, you and I'll just go together. It'll be a good
done.
time.
Yeah. That sounds like fun. I'm not going to say more like fun because then that makes me sound like a jerk. And while I am kind of a jerk, I don't want to sound like one.
Okay. That is fun. It is fun.
Yeah.
All right. So that's kind of some of the housekeeping stuff out of the way, right?
Yeah.
Talked a little bit of hunting, talked a little bit about trying to keep up with the Joneses in the technology front. Maybe we can start talking about, here's what I'll do. I'm going to run down the list of here's what we're going to talk about today. That way, if this thing runs a little bit long and you're like, oh, I don't want to listen to that, you just fast forward ahead to the piece you want to listen to. Whatever.
Good luck finding it.
Good luck finding it.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about, I guess, 4 things. And I forgot the 4th thing. I forgot to write it down, so I'll kick it to you to say it. But we're going to talk about a new secretarial order from Secretary Burgum involving the Land and Water Conservation Fund.
Yep.
We're going to talk about a new proposal to rescind what's been widely called the Public Lands Rule.
Got it.
We are going to have a lively discussion about landowner tags.
Oh, good times.
This one probably will take up the bulk of this conversation. We had, in full disclosure, you and I had a 2.5 hour discussion on landowner tags a couple of weeks ago.
We did. And then we just said we should have just done it on the air.
Yeah. So
we're just doing it on the air.
but we're going to try and somehow we have to do it in less than 2.5 hours.
Well, good luck.
It's going to be hard.
It's going to be a good time.
We are both passionate about it in different ways, I think.
It's going to be spicy.
And what is the fourth topic? Tell me that one you want to talk about.
Technology in hunting. Let's just call it that. We're probably not going to get to that.
All right. So if we don't get to that, we'll kick that to a future episode. Let's start. I'll start with the quick one.
Yeah.
So I'm going to switch the order up just a little bit. I think the fastest one here is going to be to talk about the public
landowner. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, landowner licenses.
Bad guess. Go ahead.
Okay. Public lands rule. So during the Biden administration, the Bureau of Land Management finalized a rule that, and not going to go into a lot of detail about it, just as a reminder here, finalized a rule. And the intent of that rule was to say conservation is a use of public lands on par with other uses like grazing, outdoor recreation, mining, oil and gas, timber harvesting, and then saying, and conservation is also a use, right?
It was one of the multiple uses in the multiple use equation that had to be considered, and we talked about it. We talked about this in great detail. We did at least one full episode talking about this.
We did, and there were components of this rule that were actually kind of interesting, and one of the things was, and I think we probably talked about it, is like, well, when you read the Federal Land Policy Management Act, I mean, it felt like this rule was sort of restating a different way what that act already said, that you have to account for wildlife and water and these values, and that you have to balance all of these uses. A multiple use mandate means balancing all the uses, and that means there are some places that you might not have development. And for that example, there are areas of critical environmental concern, and there are national conservation areas and things like that. Okay. But there were a couple of interesting things in that rule as well that became, one in particular, that I think became I don't want to call it the poison pill if there's such a thing, but it became very controversial. And I think it became controversial, and we talked about this, because of how it was rolled out. Because frankly, the Bureau of Land Management did a really poor job of socializing this rule and engaging the impacted communities and soliciting feedback and addressing the concerns, and on and on and on. But the part that was probably the most controversial was there was a provision that would have allowed what they called restoration leasing, which in concept was meant to say, if you want to go out, if we want to bring private dollars into management or recovering or rehabilitating, or whatever you want to call it, public lands, if we want to bring private dollars into that, we need a mechanism to do it. And it was setting up this leasing program, this idea of, okay, a nonprofit organization, a state, a local government, somebody could come in and lease parcels of land for a time limit duration, and they could come in and do restoration activities. And I think the idea behind it was like, let's do cheatgrass abatement. Let's reduce fire frequency and intensity. Let's increase rangeland health. Let's improve watershed conditions. I think the intent behind it was actually pretty good. I think the delivery of it was not, right? They had questions about, well, who was going to hold this, or who could hold this? Could foreign entities hold it? Could, some more far left green group hold it and lock other people out? Could they use it as a tool to end public livestock grazing, or to end oil and gas or renewables or any other kind of development on public lands? And the BLM tried to address it and just struggled to get ahead of the narrative. And it was just, by the time it was gone, it was just gone. They could not get the narrative back on that issue. And so you knew this was a proposal that was going to become the target of a new administration right away. It just had to be. And so that's what's happened. The BLM is proposing to repeal that rule now, and they've opened up a 60-day comment period. That comment period is going to be open until sometime in early November. If you want to comment on it, you can go to the Federal Register and find the notice and submit your comments. here's my general thought, and then I'll stop talking, let you weigh in, Nephi. Here's my general thought. Like, this rule is going to be repealed in its entirety. But that doesn't mean that there aren't pieces of this rule that could survive in a different format, or could be taken and rebuilt, and upgraded, modified, whatever you want to talk about it. Like, there might be ways to take some of these concepts from the rule and repurpose them and repackage them and put them into a different set of rulemaking down the line, maybe even with this administration in a year or two. And this is a good opportunity through this comment period to say, hey, there are a couple of good ideas here. We want to address cheatgrass. We want you to address cheatgrass. We want to encourage more private investment in public land restoration. Things like that. We want to improve watershed health. We want to improve rangeland quality. We want to improve the diversity of forbs and grasses and all of that sort of stuff, native forbs and grasses. Like, there's if you focus the comments the right way, I think there could be an opportunity on the back end of this to actually get something that could have some durability and provide some value to conservation on the ground. And so it's just another example of a comment period that's open where you know what the outcome's going to be. They're going to rescind the rule, but don't take the rescission of the rule to mean that all of the ideas in the prior rule are totally dead. They just might have to be revisited in a different way. And frankly, with better engagement of the local communities in the first instance, make them true partners in developing how this land management might occur or should occur in any kind of future rulemaking. So that's just sort of the high level. There's what it was, why it was controversial, and this comment period that's open, and my suggestion to look at it, think about submitting comment if you want. If you want to learn way more detail about it, I'd say go back to our prior episode. But what do you?
That was the quick one, everybody. That was the quick one.
I tried to be quick.
It's okay. I'm anti. I am frustrated as all get out about the whipsaw back and forth politically in different administrations on these types of efforts. It's unacceptable, and we're almost a decade deep at least in these kinds of back and forth election change, rescissions and issuing of new rules, and it's bad government. It's just not the way it should be done. It's not just bad for government; it's bad for us as hunters. It's bad for society. This isn't the way to do government. Like, this idea that it's on the opposite side as soon as you get the levers of power, this divisiveness it's unacceptable. There's been too much of it, and it's and I mean, I'm disappointed. Like, I'm disappointed that we're even saying if whether or not we like the first version, kind of the idea that the way we deal with something when we don't like it is it's like it just hurts my head to say that we didn't do a good job the first time. Which I agree with you. It wasn't rolled out the right way the first time. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to, it's this tit for tat back and forth is very frustrating. And I think, I think everybody, if it were my comment would be in the comments, it's like, you guys need to cut it out. And it's like, I told a good friend who worked for, a couple administrations ago, who worked for a governor, a Midwestern state's governor, and then he went on to run the InterGov program at the White House. I told him, when he first got in, I said the most important thing that you could possibly do, I said, was, I believe it's Executive Order 13132, and I could be wrong on that, but the order that requires consultation with states. I said the best thing that you could possibly do is you guys should rewrite that executive order and give it teeth and make it serious, so that future administrations have to come in and really have to get down and discuss these things with local governments, with state governments, and get their input. And this is actually interesting because it's going to lead into something else we're going to talk about, but get strong input on anything that's going on so that we don't have this, government driven from the top that whipsaws back and forth, based on the whim of who's in power. And so now I'm going to get off my soapbox and just say, like, I am really frustrated with it. Like, we're not going to see this isn't the end of it, but I'm frustrated by it. There needs to be a better effort to get input from people, and then to find, to compromise and find some sort of common ground on things like this. We can do better.
Yeah, it's the huge pendulum swings of having to go an equal and opposite direction, or even farther in the opposite direction. Right? Who does it?
It doesn't benefit anybody.
Yeah, when we're talking about, and let's just even focus in this conservation space. In this space, not only does it not benefit anybody, it actually causes harm. Right? Like if you're constantly every couple of years swinging this pendulum back and forth, you have zero durability. You have you've got no plan to execute.
There's no integrity in decision making.
You can't do the on the ground stuff in a way where you can say, this is the vision for how we're going to manage these lands, or this is the vision for wildlife, or this is the vision for water. Like you can't do it. And it's a long game, right? I mean, I don't know. I feel like like you said, these whipsaws, I feel like it hurts more than it makes somebody feel like, it makes a certain small segment of the population feel good. Like they got this big win.
Yeah. It's just these disgusting,
but to what end?
Disgusting sugar highs, right?
Yeah.
On one side that aren't real, that then just cause somebody on the other side to want their own version of the disgusting sugar high. And like, that's not what we need. We need to cook something durable that actually has some value, nutritional value for the people that have to ingest this for the rest of forever.
I'll even put it a different way. We have to do the hard work, right? It's the easy thing to do is just blow something up. The easy thing to do is come into power and say, we're just going to undo everything. That's easy, right? The hard thing is to say, we're going to find something that more people than not want to see happen. And we're going to find something that can have some durability and impact and bring all of these collective users and stakeholders to the table and have a real engaged process and really work with federal government and state government, local government, all working together to find these solutions. Like that's the really hard part.
You know how they used to say, like, here's how in good government, here's how you know if you got it right. Everybody's mad.
Yeah.
Like, when was the last time you saw that, where the leadership is willing to just be like, you know what, everybody, you're not going to get everything you want. Instead, it's like catering to one extreme and saying like, oh yeah, give them everything they want. Right. And I just think, it's just what it is what it is. Like, durable decisions don't make everybody happy, but they last because you've done enough to make it so that, again, like you can't have these decisions that spiral back and forth, every X number of years. There's no way for businesses or communities to build on that type of uncertainty, because you can't afford to invest time and effort in that uncertain world. And if you don't care, and this is a telling introspection. If you don't care about actually getting something done at the end, because the reality is like, it doesn't really affect you. So you're okay with you're okay with the game. The ping pong game's fine with you because you're actually not trying to do anything anyway. Okay. And take a look at yourself. Take a look in the mirror. And everybody who's working with you should take a good look at you too. Because that's not the type of person you want. Like, that's not a productive way of moving the world forward in a positive way. Say like, oh yeah, well, you care more about the game. And that's a problem. And, I don't want to make this political. That's the problem in our politics right now, is there's more people that are interested in playing the game than in the outcome. And that's what we need to get past.
Yeah, I'm going to pivot us away from politics.
Good. Let's do that.
Let me go to this second thing really quick. Land and Water Conservation Fund. Do you want to tee it up with a quick explanation of what it is? I know when we were with the governor's office, you worked on Land and Water Conservation Fund issues quite a bit. So, but before we talk about this new, I can talk about the secretarial order and what's in it. But if you want to talk about a little bit of just what is the Land and Water Conservation Fund, why does it exist, that kind of thing, that might be a good jumping off point.
Yeah, LWCF, it's a huge program. It's important. It conserves important lands. It improves outdoor recreation opportunities throughout the nation. There's an LWCF project in basically every community in the country. LWCF, Land and Water Conservation Fund, works in partnership with other federal, state, and local efforts. It can do things as varied as buying and protecting lands in national parks or wildlife refuges, forests. It can build trails. It can improve ballparks in local communities. It can do, it can create working forests. It can do boat ramps. It supports, parks and playgrounds. It preserves battlefields and cultural sites. One of the unique things about land and water conservation is that the funding comes from primarily from offshore oil and gas revenues. And there is a formula funding methodologies for how much money can go to each state, but within the states submit projects. And those projects are then can be approved and gain funding for LWCF, and states become responsible for upkeep of a lot of those projects in terms of like parks and playgrounds and things like that. So there's a significant workload to states when they do take that money. But it's covered every community in the United States of America has benefited from LWCF funding. It was expiring, a decade ago or so, and states came together not only to make it permanent, but also to make the funding permanent for LWCF. So people didn't have to worry about it disappearing, because there was a question mark about whether it would even exist, but it's here, it's back, it's here today. And so that's LWCF.
Yeah, and in fact, so you mentioned about a decade ago, it was towards the tail end of the first Trump administration, and I would say this was the administration's signature conservation win, right? Like in that first term, which was achieving the permanent reauthorization of Land and Water Conservation Fund and the permanent funding at $900 million a year. Because up to this point, there was an authorization, but there wasn't a permanent appropriation. So now there's $900 million a year for LWCF as a result of, and it was I'm trying to remember now. Boy, somebody loses a Senate race and you forget who they are. Cory Gardner in Colorado. Yeah, Cory Gardner was a big champion on this on the Republican side, and so was Steve Daines, both senators. Steve Daines out of Montana. Big priorities for them, really important to their reelection efforts. Cory Gardner lost his reelection bid, but Senator Daines won his reelection bid, and President Trump pushed for this to be passed and on his desk. So it was. Now, I think you mentioned there's all this community, ballparks and trails and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So think of this as two pots of money is I think the easiest way to describe it. You have a state side pot and a federal side pot, like a state program and a federal program. So the things when you think about ballparks and pools and playgrounds and things like that, it comes out of the state side project list. Right? The federal program is different, and it's for different purposes. So think of it as like an easement for fishing access, or acquiring some land for that's prime elk winter range or something like that. Reestablishing a migration corridor for big game. So there can be multiple purposes, but it's more of the land acquisition side. Is how I would describe the federal program side. So what happened a couple of weeks ago is that Secretary Burgum issued a secretarial order on how he's directing his agency, or his Department of the Interior, to implement the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And I just want to mention two pieces, because most of the changes to the program versus how it was implemented, before the secretarial order, most of the changes are to this federal program. And I'm just going to focus on two, because I think they're really, there are a few others, but I think there are two that are really noticeable changes that I think are worth mentioning. So change one, it says that proposed fee acquisitions, meaning proposed acquisitions of property, should prioritize acquisitions for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So that would be for things like National Wildlife Refuge expansion and the National Park Service. So for that, you'd think of things like the Kelly parcel in Wyoming last year that was sold, state parcels sold to the federal government using a bunch of LWCF money to expand Grand Teton National Park by 640 acres. So it says that unless, and here's the kicker, unless the acquisition establishes public access to isolated federal property administered by another bureau or office that is not otherwise reasonably accessible. So the way I'm reading this language is, it basically says, we are going to the greatest extent possible, we're going to limit acquisitions to wildlife refuge expansion and national park expansion, unless you can show us that for the sole purpose of accessing otherwise inaccessible lands, this is a good use of funds. So you can't use it for habitat purposes or anything like that, or whatever things you want to think about it. It is for access to, and this is the place you think about as Bureau of Land Management. You could still use some of those funds to be able to acquire fee title to access inaccessible BLM lands, but not for other fee acquisition. Why does that matter? Well, let's move to the second piece, and I think this will tell you why it matters a little bit. So the second change on this, there are requirements now. So in the past, if there were an acquisition under the federal program, there would be notification and a request for input from the governor and local communities. But that input was not binding upon the secretary, right? So if there was a proposed land acquisition in the state, and you had and I'll describe it this way. You have a willing buyer, willing seller. When you're talking proposed land acquisition, you're talking about, in most cases, you're talking about buying land from a private landowner, sometimes from the state, but in most cases, it's going to be from a private landowner, and putting it into the federal estate, right? So willing buyer, willing seller, but the willing seller is typically a private landowner. In the past, you'd notify the state that this proposal was happening and notify local government, and they'd be able to provide their input. And then the Secretary of Interior would ultimately have the power to make the final decision on whether to enter into that transaction. The change to the order requires both the sign-off. It requires that the governor approve of the sale and that the local government approve of the sale. It requires specifically a written expression of support by both the affected governor or their verified designee and local county or county government equivalent being required for the acquisition of land, water, or an interest in land or water. So interest in land meaning like an easement, right? Under the federal Land and Water Conservation Fund program. I point this out because here's the part I struggle with, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, Nephi. I struggle with this a little bit because I totally get from one side of this how, and we were just talking about it before, how we want to have the federal government working closely together with state and local government and involving them in decision-making processes. But also, if I own land and I want to sell it to somebody, I don't want to have to get approval from my county commissioners and my governor before I can make that sale. So it's this weird spot to be. And it's written in a way that could pit your county governments against your state government if they have different interests or potentially from different political parties.
How much?
It's very interesting.
How much of this do you think has to go with pushback from, for example, with LWCF, we've seen situations where a third-party conservation-related group comes in, buys a large private holding, large ranch, and at first you're like, oh, that's great. It's that entity, front country hunters, the front country hunters and anglers is gonna, there's an assumption that they're gonna have this 5,000 acres. It's gonna be, it's them. And there has been discussion but front country hunters and anglers buys it for whatever they buy it for. Suddenly the market changes. Whatever happens, they then make a pitch to the federal entity to add it to the federal estate. And so then, and they do that. They do that because then they can free up their front country hunting money to go buy another piece, and then potentially add that. That's happened, and now with a fictitious organization. But do you think that this is pushback against that, third parties buying land and then selling it to the federal government because they have that relationship where it's easier to do so?
No, I don't. I mean, I think that could be, it might be a small element of it. I think I'm trying to remember the name of the property and I was going to look it up, but I was thinking more along the lines of, like there was that large acquisition here in our state 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Along the North Platte, southwest of Casper, yep. I think is where it was. And it was what, 30,000 acres or something like that. It was a pretty big chunk of BLM or of private land, a ranch that was then sold to the BLM, and land and water conservation dollars, I believe, were used to acquire that.
Yep.
And the governor objected to that acquisition. I think some county commissioners objected to that acquisition, or at least to the process that it went through. I can't remember if they objected in completely to the acquisition, if it was more a process-based objection that they felt like they didn't have enough opportunity to weigh in on. But I could see examples like that being ones where they become more frustrated. And I think about it in this sense, like it's taking something that was a piece of private land that was generating tax revenue for the state and putting it into the federal estate, and now you're having to do the PILT, payment in lieu of taxes calculation to see if you can recoup some of those tax dollars, and you might not get all those same tax dollars back.
Yeah.
How does that impact county government? How does that impact state government resources and so forth? And they probably felt like they wanted to be part of that conversation and weren't as much. And it's those
tough.
Types of things that I think might have been triggering as well.
Yeah. And I'd say I think this is really I think this is very challenging. Why? Because I think, that situation where you say, I'm an individual private landowner and I've made the decision I want to sell this. I should be able to sell it to whoever I want to. Well, is the federal government one of those whoever I want to, where I should be able to sell it if that's who's giving the, that's who's providing it? And, does it matter? Well, maybe I just want it to be, part of a national park instead of, like, how do we get Grand Teton, Dave? Grand Teton National Park.
I know.
They're
big chunk of it was a donation from the Rockefellers.
So it's and that was, there were people angry about that at the time, right? There were a whole bunch of cattlemen who, led by a future senator and governor, who
our old boss's grandfather, right?
who led a protest ride through that area. And I actually have I have empathy for both sides. I have empathy for a private landowner who would want to make that sale. On the other hand, I also think it's totally appropriate to ask for. I don't know if I think you should ask. I think local government and the governor should get to weigh in on it, because I think that those individuals, they represent as close as you can get. If you're to say like the local county commission, Like, well, that's your local residency. Those are the people who are going to be affected by that decision to sell those 30,000 acres. Those are the people whose property taxes and neighborhoods and all those things get affected by the transfer of significant acreage over into the federal estate. If the federal estate, and I think that, one of the things that the challenges about this is that it maybe if it were different, I'd feel differently. And maybe if the federal government, like if the federal government owning a piece of land or more land in your community were just like everybody else owning, it was no different than the Nature Conservancy buying that land, well, I'd probably feel differently because the Nature Conservancy is going to be part of the tax base, and they're going to be, that's different than land transferring to the federal estate. So I think I have empathy for both sides. And, the good news is that this will change the next administration.
Gee. Well, let me ask you a question, because I've got some empathy for both sides as well. But I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to create a hypothetical too.
Okay.
So before you answer the question, I'll do the question followed by a hypothetical. But the question is, do you think that the governor and county officials should have input or veto authority over a sale? And the way I say that, because the way it's written now, it's effectively veto authority over a sale between a private landowner and the federal government. And the follow-up to this is a bit of a hypothetical. If that veto authority is allowed, and like logically we think about it, it's probably going to be like used in like you can probably see how it'd break out on political lines, frankly.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And there's still these hundreds of millions of dollars that are appropriated and can be used. And can you see a situation where, because of that veto authority, that funds will actually be funneled to a handful of states or locations that you will see
100%.
Right? Like, and other places won't receive any of that.
Yeah, this was already happening. Over time, you've had a situation where if you look at the expenditure of LWCF funds for purchasing lands and leases, if you look at them, they were generally there's a few targeted states. It's not like they was going, it's like 1/50th of the funding goes to Idaho and 1/50th of the funding goes to Mississippi. That's not how it worked. So you've seen, I think, predominantly a few Western states in particular garner the majority of that funding. And so, and that's because, you did have where you've had, and it was basically those conservative states didn't get a lot of it. And that's because those governors and conservative county commissioners and stuff, they didn't want much to do with it. And so you had states with Democratic governors who tended to, I believe, benefit more to a higher degree from that funding and from utilizing that mechanism. So do I think it's going to happen? Of course it's going to happen. It's already happened. There's already a track record. That's what will continue to happen. I don't know.
But do you think it might happen even to a greater extent?
Certainly, absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know that people have anticipated that ramification. Like if you've sat back and thought about that, of what that does into, within states. If you are a state that doesn't want to see more federal lands, you probably don't care. Maybe it doesn't matter to you. But it in a way, it just creates a certain inequity, an inequity of opportunity and an inequity of, land types and things like that. And so I don't think it's a real healthy thing.
And then back to the first question, like, what do you think about the different? Do you think there's a difference between providing input, asking the governor and the counties to provide input and have that input be thoroughly considered versus effectively a veto over a land sale between a private landowner and the federal government.
Yeah, of course, there's a difference. So, but there's a relationship problem too. So, if you live in the state of Utah, do you want to see if you are the government in Utah, when it comes to federal land acquisitions and stuff like that, do you think that Utah wants to see veto power, or does Utah want to see consideration? Well, they love
want veto
to get
power.
Yeah, of course they do. Of course they
veto
do.
power.
Yeah. And probably the same thing, I mean, you can just look at where the governorships lined up and you can tell who's going to fall which direction on this one. Because they're Western states, with the exception of Wyoming, that's done a good job of figuring out how to, create leverage that other states didn't have. States don't want to there's no trust. People don't trust the federal, the people don't trust the agencies to really consider what they have to say. And so that's why they're saying they want veto power. But that creates a huge problem though, because once you give them the veto power, there's not once you give somebody veto power, what are the chances they're going to come to the table and talk about it in good faith? Like they get much lower.
And what about this example? And I can think of how this could play out differently in different states, but I'll use Colorado as an example, and then maybe I'll use Montana as an example, right? What if you had so in Colorado, the West Slope counties are all very conservative, right? And there's a lot of public land there, a lot of BLM land, probably ideologically aligned a lot with Utah of wanting wanting veto power at the county level. Well, in Colorado, the governor, it has very different political ideologies, right? Yeah. Governor Polis being a Democrat, right? What if you had a proposal in Colorado of a landowner in one of those counties that wanted to sell their property to the BLM, and the governor sends in a letter of support and says, great idea, love it. And the counties say, nope, and they use their veto card, because you have to have both. So now you have a split in government and one body against the other, and that sale can't go through. And the reverse could happen in a place like Montana, where you have some counties, think about the Missoula and Bozeman areas and so forth, that are more left-leaning counties where maybe the county would support the acquisition. And if you're thinking about it from the most local level, right, that the county might support the acquisition, but the state, perhaps at the governor's level, might oppose the acquisition, and so it wouldn't go through. So you've created this system where all of these things have to align. You have to have a willing buyer, willing seller, and the county government and the state government all saying this is the right thing to do, or a sale can't go through. I think it's going to limit where some of these acquisitions, including easements, access points to rivers, all that kind of stuff, like where those things can go through.
Do you think it's permanent, or do you think this is an interesting, or do you think that, the limiting, if people believe that the program is more equitably used, if they think that their voice is heard on the state level, the local level, do you think that then you get a return to normal, where initially you'd think that there's going to be a lot of knee-jerk reaction of, no, I want to utilize that veto power? Do you think that it goes back to being like, no, actually, I'm good, I can move forward with it?
I don't know, because, and this goes back to the whole premise of the early part of the discussion of do you search for something durable, or do you just want to win in the moment, right? Let's use that example of that piece of property in Wyoming, right? That ultimately did get sold over the objections of the governor and the counties. Well, what if the secretary had said, I hear you, and I don't know if this played out this way at all. I hear you. I've taken your concerns into account. We're going to bump your PILT payments in that area by 15%, or, I'm making up a number, but right. We're going to make it right. Standpoint, somehow. We're going to make it right. We're going to make it whole. And that's the way of addressing it and hearing it and saying, we want to make sure that from a tax standpoint and a resources standpoint that you're made whole. We'll make sure that there are resources available for fire fighting, or like all that stuff. Do you think that would have appeased them? I don't know. Like, is this something that's so black and white that it's either
kind of a
listening to me means doing exactly what I say, which is I don't want this to happen, or listening to me means hearing my concerns and trying to address some of the concerns while still moving forward with the buyer-seller relationship? I think it's I don't know what the answer to that is.
This is a very boring conversation, but it's also
Sorry.
That's okay, but it's also it's all hypothetical. And that's why it doesn't work, because what we're talking about is like, well, what if we did have this and we could make it that? Because we don't have that. And so we're living in a world where the reality of the ownership and the transfer are one thing. And yeah, if we could change the program and make it work, because that's what you're really saying, right? Is like, well, what if we could make this work good for the local governments? What if we could have enough flexibility to make it so that they don't feel like they're getting hosed? Well, yeah, they might love it. They might not. Problem is we don't have the program.
Well, fundamentally, I think this piece comes back to in the Western states in particular, and maybe it's different in the East. I'd be curious what people think, in the East on the acquisition side, or Midwest and east of us, outside of the predominantly public land states. There's the school of thought here that we shouldn't be growing the federal estate, period. Right? There's a school of thought from some that just say, like, this is a policy position I have. I'm not anti-public lands, but I am anti-growing the federal estate. And so if we're going to do an acquisition, I need to see that you're selling an equal amount of land someplace else. So there's a no net gain in the federal estate. And that could come into play in some of this, just the underlying, it might not be about that particular land sale. They might say, the PILT money, that's fine. They might say, I get the access. That'll be great to have 5 more miles of river access there. Hunters and anglers are going to love it. Outdoor recreationists are going to love it. Heck, I'm going to love it too. But I fundamentally don't think that the federal estate should be grown. And so I would use my veto power on it no matter what. And I need to have that veto power because we need to make sure that the federal estate doesn't grow. And I think there's some of that underlying current in some big public land states. I'm curious if that's there in the Midwest and Southeast and Northeast, where there's not as much public land.
And I think that's a problem. And I think we're going to talk about this on our next subject too, which is there's a problem in perception, because I think that when you move seats, when you move to where you're sitting at, if you were to move east of the Mississippi, land acquisition, that's a whole different type of ball game there. And the types of opportunities and the amount of opportunities that are available there are different. And hunters are going to see it an entirely different way. When you're talking about expanding wildlife refuges east of the Mississippi, that's a huge deal for those folks who don't have access to public lands and waters east of the Mississippi. It's really different when you move to Utah. And when somebody talks about, increasing the federal estate in Utah versus increasing the federal estate in, say, Louisiana, it's going to be viewed in an entirely different light, with totally different perspectives and entirely different problems. And you may have hunters and anglers on opposite sides of the issue. And that's why ultimately something like LWCF, I actually think why you do need to have local government buy-in. And you asked, well, will it move the money to certain states? Probably. Is that a good thing? And I think you'd have to say, we don't know yet, but maybe. Maybe if you've got a state that does have the ability and can absorb those dollars and create those opportunities, and obviously if there's politically the state, both at the local and state level, is pro, then man, that seems like a great place to spend the money rather than some place where the money creates controversy. Just a thought.
It is a thought.
No.
As a guy that likes to hunt and fish and wants to access, I'd like to see money spent in my state. I'd like to see it. I would like to see, here's what I'd love to see, right? And what acquisitions? I'd love to see some of that LWCF money used to acquire tiny easements.
I would too.
That's at every corner, at every checkerboard corner in this state.
Everywhere. That's one of my biggest beefs that I would like to see. And we talked about this with LWCF. Like, we see it being used to purchase parcels on the Front Range of Colorado. And frankly, I want 5 feet wide and a mile long in hundreds and hundreds of places. I want a trail. If we could just get a trail, like an easement trail for like one dude to be able to walk, or a two, not even two, we don't even need two.
Yeah, you're
track.
You're not talking about building a trail,
no,
right? You're just talking about trail width.
Trail width, like the trail, like we don't need any machinery. We just need the legal ability for people to walk through from point A across B to C. Do that thousands of times and you would create so much hunting opportunity in this country. We don't need big easements. We don't need big parcels. We need tiny little, very low impact easements. I think that's, to me, there's nothing I'd rather have. Like, that is my number one want. That's it.
Yeah. So I have two, right? In areas that are subject to increased threats of development, subdividing ranches, for example, and putting ranchettes of 20 acres, 50 acres, 100 acres, whatever, and fragmenting, especially in this urban rural fire interface, like where we end up with having these catastrophic fires that destroy lots of property because people are building in places maybe they shouldn't build. Like, I'm looking at those places that are really important winter range habitats and transition habitats for some of the critters I like to chase here in the fall. I would love to have investments to make sure, and maybe the investment is keeping it private land and just getting more conservation easements in place. But in some instances, it might be strategic acquisitions into the federal estate. I'd like to see money used to prevent that type of, I don't want the millionaire, billionaire types coming in there just because they want to have these incredible views and, messing up, hundreds of years worth of migration routes for elk or mule deer or pronghorn or bighorn sheep or moose, or you name the critter. So that's a priority of mine. Like, those areas that are at most risk for development and preventing that, particularly that kind of development. And then yes, to exactly what you said. I just think about that a lot, of like, if we invested a bunch of money in getting people out there and getting survey pins put where we don't have the pins or they've been pulled, and getting easements and whatever infrastructure we need, whether it's a ladder over a fence or whatever it is, like all the infrastructure we need to be able to access all of these parcels. I think you could open up, you could open up millions of acres of land for hunting opportunity, for example, with these tiny easements. Some of them might be, like you said, 5 feet wide, and they might only be 5 feet long.
I think it's
not be much to them.
Yeah, I think we haven't built the paradigm and the infrastructure. The opportunities have been there for a long time, but the whole paradigm has been built. This easement concept and paradigm has been built around big easements. It's been around square easements. In general, like this purchasing easements, and this is a gross oversimplification, but I don't think that groups haven't concentrated on like little opportunities and little dollar amounts. That's just not the way we've thought about it. But certainly, I think that absolutely is where the most bang for your buck exists in terms of opportunity.
And think about the corner crossing example. So I know some people out there are thinking like, well, we just had this corner crossing case that says corner crossing is legal, and this decision out of the 10th Circuit saying it's legal. And I'd say, okay, first of all, that's limited to the states of the 10th Circuit. It's not everywhere. But let's just assume it applied everywhere. Let's assume the Supreme Court takes up this case and says, and upholds the 10th Circuit decision, and the corner crossing ruling applies everywhere. Well, what does that mean? It means you still have to find a survey pin and momentarily pass through the airspace from one corner to another without setting foot on any of that private land. Like there's still it's still a very precise exercise to avoid being guilty of a trespass. And if you could just acquire an easement on either side of that fence on those private lands, so you could just, hey, I've got my Onyx. I can't find the pin, but I know I'm within 10 feet of it. And maybe you actually have markers that mark the easement, and you're like, I know I can walk through this 10-foot wide swath here and I'm safe. Like that's what I think about is then you don't have to worry about, I have to find the USGS pin, which might be buried under 3 inches of dirt. Or there might be a fence that's 10 feet off from where the pin is, and the pin might be on the other side of that fence. And then you're like, am I going to damage the fence? And like all the calculus that goes into your head as you're trying to do, how do you do this corner crossing and be legal under the terms of what the court has established. If you use LWCF and just acquire a bunch of small easements, problem solved. Like it would make it so much easier. In addition to all the other places you're probably thinking of, but that's one thing that pops into my head.
Well, Dave, this was a great episode.
I got a question for you.
We're done with this episode. We're done.
That's what I was going to say. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Which was, should we call that one this episode and then have a landowner tags episode?
We're doing that.
I think that's
we have to, because this episode would be so tedious and long. But now this is like an hour-long episode, legit. And so we could just wrap a bow around this, and then you suckers have to wait a week.
A week? That's we're pretty solid if they only have to wait a week.
I don't know.
We get accused of waiting 2-3 months sometimes.
Well, we could, like, legitimately, Dave, I got time. We could, we'll just hit stop, and then we'll hit start. Again. And you and I'll have the same conversations. Just that these listeners, you won't get it for a week or two. We're still going to talk about it. You just have no idea. Like, it's going to happen. It's going to happen right now. But you don't get to listen yet.
Yep, I'm with you.
It's happening.
So, I agree. It's happening. So everything we promised you at the beginning of this episode is still going to happen, just not in this
someday.
Episode. Someday you'll get.
Yeah, it's like everything in life. It's like It'll probably happen.
So we'll stop with that. So now you can listen to us talk about a little bit of our hunting. You can listen to us talk about the public lands rule and hear the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And then next we'll have our big discussion about landowner tags.
Yep, this is going to be great.
This
is awesome.
So thanks everybody for listening. Really appreciate it. Remember, you can get us at Your Mountain at itsyourmountain.com. You can find us on the social media platforms of Instagram and Facebook. And I think we're on YouTube. We don't really check that much. We're definitely
not yet though, and not the next episode because
our audios are on YouTube.
Yeah.
We just don't have any video on YouTube.
I think YouTube frowns on that. So if you're YouTube, then for sure there's video on there. Don't look for it, but it's probably there if your last name is YouTube.
Huh?
If you're Mr. YouTube, because I heard that they like frown on that. I heard that they'll like kick you off the YouTubes if you don't actually have video. If you just have your podcast up there with no video.
Well, then we might get kicked off. We got to get some video up there soon. Yeah, we better get video up soon. All right. Well, again, thanks everybody for listening, and we're going to push stop and then record right away, and we're going to have 2 episodes to give to you, but probably over the course of a month. And so while we're doing that, all of you, thanks again for listening. And remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.